From the back, the first task is to pry off that little bracket there, that little lobe where we cock the shutter, and hopefully it'll come off easily. That's good. It's positioned so that it can't get away once the shutter's in the camera. Put that there. That's the shutter release mechanism. Right, front of the shutter. Unhook the retaining ring. Remove the shutter speed cam plate. Take out the main drive there. Coupling. This, I suspect that was loose. I suspect that wasn't connected over its post, because it certainly acted like that was the case. There's our shutter release lever. Unhook the main drive spring for the shutter. That's a little bit tired, but it'll do. Take off the main drive cam there. Now, retard gear train can come off. 2 screws for that. And that can go straight into a container of naphtha for a bit of a soak. We'll come back to that later. The shutter needs to be completely stripped down. Everything looks to be rather tired and sticky. That'll be lubricants where there shouldn't be lubricants, lubricants dried out where there should be lubricants. Get this little latch lever off here. This holds the shutter in the cocked position. That screw was loose. It's unusual to find as many loose screws in one camera as this. Sometimes you do. The worst examples are where the camera has belonged to a motorcyclist and he's just stored it in his pannier bags, and the vibration will shake the things to pieces. That's this. So that spring's not tucked in properly. Okay. So that spring looks a bit damaged. On this lever here, that spring is not tucked in correctly at all. So I'll have to investigate that closely. I expect that is a relic of a previous repair. I'll just unhook this spring. You probably can't see any of this because my hands are in the way. Take off that pallet wheel. Single screw here. That spring does 2 jobs. It's the return spring for the B lever. It's also the return spring for our XM sync lever here. Now, one other small spring here I need to get out. It's very good at getting away. So I'm going to hold one pair of tweezers over the top so it can't get away, and another piece to unhook it. Pop that carefully aside. Now to the back of the shutter. These 3 screws can come off. XM sync can come off that there. That screw's loose, that screw's loose, that screw's loose. It's a wonder the shutter hadn't flown apart. Let's have a look at the blades. What I'm looking for here is to see if they've been assembled in the traditional order. And the traditional order would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But here they've made 1, 2, 3, 4. So that the blades are not in the correct order. Not that that causes a great deal. I don't think that would cause you any problems as long as they're in the correct positions. There are only two blades that are unusual. This one, where it's got a steep cutout at the back to clear the shaft running through it, and this cover blade. The cover blade always goes back over the position of the first blade. So, the mechanism plate, I'm just removing the 3 screws that hold the lens tube in place. The lens tube is the brass tube in the centre. That's where the lens fits. In some cases the lens tube is threaded and a lens may screw directly into it. In this case it's not, it's plain because the lens is mounted on the front of the housing. So there I've got my shutter in little pieces. I'll zoom you out a little bit. And I'll have to clean all those things up and put it back together. Those shutter blades are very dirty looking. I'm certain I'm going to have to polish those with some Brasso. Now there are 3 screws on this plate in the shutter body here. I'm checking that they are tight. They are. That plate doesn't need to come out. That can stay there. There's nothing behind that. So that's good. That shutter's stripped down there and can be cleaned and reassembled. I don't see anything of great concern apart from that lever that had the damaged spring. And I may be able to, I can replace the lever with another one if I don't like the look of the spring. That won't be a problem. Okay, I'm ready to start reassembling the shutter. I've got my components cleaned. So starting with the mechanism plate. I'll put the blade actuating ring in place. Playing hard to get today, I'm not sure why. That latch seems unnaturally stiff. I'm going to investigate that. Maybe bent. Right, back where we were. I think that was slightly bent. Get this detent in place. That's good. And fit the lens tube. And it goes on one way. Just put that pallet out of the way. With 3 screws, 2 of them are the same length, one's slightly longer. The difference in length is about 1/2 millimetre maybe. It's quite small. The longest screw goes through this bracket. That bracket holds the main spring. And that bracket goes there on that little post. If you mix the screws up and put the long screw somewhere else, it will stick through the mechanism plate and catch on the blades, and the shutter won't work, or the blades will get damaged, or both. That's moving smoothly. I'm going to lubricate that with a bit of graphite powder and find the right tweezers for that job. Just drop a bit of graphite powder down onto the blade actuating ring in those positions. And just work the blade actuating ring backwards and forwards. Battery just went flat there, so that's why I was off camera. Right, let's get this mechanism plate. I've lubricated that with some graphite powder, blown away the excess, just making sure there's no graphite powder on the front face there. Move the blade actuating ring to the blade open position and start fitting the blades. And I'll put them in the correct positions. Get rid of that thread of cotton. Blade number 1 is here. Blade number 2 is here. You can see that cutout in the blade clears that hole. That's where the pin comes through. Blade number 3. Blade number 4. Just a thread of cotton there, I want to get rid of that. Blade number 5. And blade number 6 is the cover blade, and that goes over the position of blade number 1. And normally I swing the blades in slightly and then put the shutter case on the top. And in this case I think we can lower it straight on. You can. And fit the screws that hold it all together. I'll do the screws up lightly. If a blade had jumped off the post while I was lowering the case over it, I don't want to tighten the case up and damage the blade. Just check that that works. Those blades open and shut. No problem there. I can do those 3 screws up. These were loose, of course, when we started. like a lot of screws on this camera. That's good. A little bit of molybdenum paste on that detent spring there. And on that post and that post there. Now, the top of the shutter is a spring needs to go on here. It's a bit tricky to get over the, it's got to pick up the end of it and hook it behind that stud. No, didn't quite manage it. That's it. So both these levers are spring loaded now. And put the setting lever in place. There's a little detent spring in the case at this point where the post comes up. In this little piece section here, I just put a wipe of molybdenum on there so that the lever will move easily. I might put something else in there first actually. I'll put the B lever in place, I think. It's easier to get the spring in before I do the other part. The B lever sits here. I'll open up the shutter blade so the B lever can drop right down into its blade open position. Now the spring for the B lever and the XM sync lever has to go on here. It's a bit tricky to get in because it has to be, the end of it needs to be pulled right round and behind the lever. Check that the screw's tight, check that the lever moves freely. That's good. Now, back where we were, get this in. The post here needs to come up behind that spring, like that. And the retainer how does this go? Goes there. Three screws hold that in place. As usual, get all three screws in position, then go around and tighten them up. Back to the front of the shutter. Put the pallet wheel in place. this sector gear which drives the pallet wheel. Get that in position. Pull that tab back, drop that down into position. And fit the return spring for that lever. Hook it over the post. Stretch it out. No, that's not correct. It's behind the lever instead of in the hole. So I've got to move that. That's better. Now that's correct. That's cocked. That works nicely. That does the flash sync for the X and M flash sync speeds. So far so good. Now our lever. This lever had a damaged spring on it. It was distorted. I've taken it off the lever and straightened that spring up, and I'll see if it'll do the job without any problems. Yeah, it looks good. That's good. I have a spare here in case I needed to use it, but I'm not going to need to. Keep drifting off camera, I don't know how much you missed. Probably all of it. Hook that spring into position. Check that that arm moves freely. That's good. A wife of molybdenum on that arm at the tip. Got the shutter release here. I'll just put a very faint smear of molybdenum paste on that. Fit that into position, make sure it goes behind the B lever so that it lifts the B lever. It looks good. The main drive cam, just lubricate the inside lightly with molybdenum paste, and the outside, particularly that curved face there. Let's see if I can lower that into position. That's great. Just put a little smear of molybdenum paste on that main drive spring. Hook that into position on the cam, and then just bring the tab round and lock it into position. Now I should be able to cock that shutter If we press the release, the shutter will fire. So far so good, but I've got to clean my retard gear train and self-timer or delay action. So I'll work those in the naphtha multiple times until I'm satisfied that everything's moving freely. They can get bound up if they've got oil on there that's hardened up and dried up, dust. That'll also make them fail to run smoothly or at all. And I'll just set the self-timer and release it. It's a little bit reluctant to run down. Yeah, that's alright. It's difficult to keep the tip of my tweezers on the release lever here. That sounds good. Very even. Yep, no problem there. I'll take those two speed trains out of there, put that to one side, and blow the excess solvent out of there, and along with it any dust or oil or other contaminants that are suspended in the solvent, because you want everything out of there. If you just leave them to dry, the volatiles will go and you'll be left with whatever oil or so forth was present, which you don't want. Let's just check the action of that. It seems good. And the self-timer. Likewise, that seems good. These are a little bit mottled and stained on the top. Those marks will cause us no problem. I'm just going to lubricate both of these speed trains with a bit of graphite powder. I'm just holding the pallet lever back with my finger, and I'm working the lever backwards and forwards to run it into the gear set. And the self-timer, again I'll drop some graphite powder onto the gear sets and then let that run. Blow the excess out.